I am inviting this gentleman who's been my friend for 8 years. He took a silent meditation class for 3 months, and I was awed. I asked him, how can you do that? And he told me, we go to college, study for 3 years, 4 years, and get degrees. But what do we do for my inner self? Isn't it worth spending 3 months? And from that day on, I'm a total fan of this person. He's one person who I usually don't question anything he says, because whatever he says would be better for me than if I come up myself. On that note, it is my pleasure to introduce my friend, philosopher, and guide, Ankur Jain, who has had an amazing career trajectory. He was from IT background, then he was VC with Bloomberg Capital, one of the well-known VCs in San Francisco. Then he was in Nexus, and then he started his own fund, and I keep meeting startups he invests in. So we are really excited that he's here today, and we've had done this talk before, so we are gonna be free-flowing in conversation, and if I forget, I'll look at the questions, and if I'm not, then it's good. That means it's all natural, and our spirit is really, coming up. So on that note, Ankur, welcome, and please introduce yourself, and we want to know your story, who you are, where you're coming from, and where you're going.
I'll answer the last part first. I don't know where I'm going. That's the easy one. Casey gave a little background. So originally I grew up in India. I moved to the US in late 90s for studies. I came out here to UCLA. I did my master's in computer science. And this was late 90s. And how many of you were in the Valley in those days, late 90s? No, very few people. Okay, maybe one. So, I was in computer science and studying computer science in 98, 99. And a good student wanted to make $1 million before he graduated from school in those days. So I joined a startup while I was doing my master's. This was, while I was working, while I was studying. And within a few months, we were acquired for about $500 million. And it felt good. I'm still a student, but there's some paper money that I could call mine, but they say easy come, easy go. So 2000, bubble burst, and then it all evaporated. And the ironic thing was, the company had given me a loan so I could early exercise my stock options. Now, the stock was worthless, but I still owed the loan. So anyway, so the long story, but the company forgave the loan. So my economic victory was, I did not have to pay money for the privilege of working in a startup. So anyway, after that, I came to the Valley. This was in LA. Then I moved here. Then I was part of another startup in the enterprise networking space, and we were acquired by Cisco in 2004. It was a good exit. We were acquired for about $1.3 billion, and then I was heading a group in Cisco for a few years. Around the same time, I decided to go to Wharton here, which is a few blocks away from here, for an executive MBA, and then I ended up moving to venture capital. Initially, I was part of a firm called Bloomberg Capital, which Casey mentioned, which invests in the US and Israel, and I got experience in both of those ecosystems. Then I was with another venture fund called Nexus Venture Partners, which invests in the US and India. I also was co-founder of my own startup, which was, it's a long story, but a lot of my background was in tech, and the startup used to develop natural pesticides. So, you'll try to figure out pesticides, enterprise networking, they look very similar. But again, and the reason why I did that was a lot to do with some of the other parallel things happening in my life. So around 2006, when I was at Cisco, I got introduced to yoga and meditation. And it was, again, long story, but I did this program called Inner Engineering, which, as the name suggests, is about engineering yourself. And I started applying some of those tools. I practiced some meditation, some tools around awareness, diet, lifestyle. And as I started to do that, the experience began to shift. Things that would stress me out some time back, they stopped bothering me. My energy levels became much higher. I used to have a problem with acid reflux that completely went away. I began to be a lot more in the present. My quality of sleep improved. These are very sort of superficial things, but for many people these are very important things. So I'm still going over this, and it's almost as if my life experience moved to a different level. I started joking to friends that it is as if my life has moved from regular TV to HD TV. The whole thing is richer. The whole experience was richer, and that's when the priorities in life also began to shift. So about 7 years ago, with Casey's mentioned, I took a 3-month leave of absence. I went to an ashram, just focused on sadhana for 3 months. It was intense. It was like going to bed at late at night, getting up at 4:35 a.m. in the morning, and you've got 14-16 hours of sadhana every day you're doing. But what it did was it helped me see a life at a different level. It allowed me, I think, just like, it's like peeling the layers of an onion. Once you've started to uncover your own layers and go under, you begin to sort of see what are some of the drivers which matter in life, and how do you, and I felt I was just living life at a very superficial level, and if you begin to start moving your attention inward, there's a completely different way of living. And I began to sort of began to walk in that direction. And so the startup which I co-founded was essentially motivated by that. I wanted to do something which is very high impact, and I felt world is being taken over by these toxic insecticides, and I need to do something about it. And so I started this company, and again, long story, we got some great success initially, and we were in some of the top hotels, hospitals, but then something happened, and then sort of that company, we sort of failed, and I had to shut down the company. It was very painful for me. But I had a fairly good investing track record, and last year I decided to start this new firm called Emergent Ventures. It's an early stage venture capital firm. We've done about 10 investments so far.
That's great. So what's the moral of the story? VCs should stick to being VCs and not try to be entrepreneurs.
No, actually, I would say that my experience as a VC, both before and after, there's a significant shift. Being through that journey of the whole startup journey, where especially, and maybe more so because the startup failed, I think it just allows me to empathize with founders in a different way, which I did not earlier. Looking back, I would say my ability as a VC grew tremendously, I felt. But anyway, but I think one good model of the story as a VC is, unless you failed as an entrepreneur, it's hard to be a good VC.
Then you got to be really careful. If someone is a very successful entrepreneur and he's turned VC, you got to take his advice with a pinch of salt. So that's great. On that note, remember once we had a conversation which really triggered our journey of doing these events, which is you see people who are coming from all over the world, and then VCs are turning them down, and they are giving the reasons why team is not solid, or ROI is not good, or their product is not, the vision is not good. But you told me most of the time people are turned down because you don't have confidence on the person. So how do you understand or what creates confidence in a VC, in an entrepreneur?
So I think it's a very interesting, and I would say from an entrepreneur perspective, a difficult situation where you're going and talking to all these investors, and if you ask the investors what do they care about, 80 to 90% will say the most important thing is the team. And you will go out, and let's say you get turned down, and invariably you'll get a feedback where it's too early, it's the market is not big enough, or something around that. Nobody gives you the feedback, I just didn't have confidence in you, which is why I'm not investing. But that 90% of the time, that is the reason you were not, because they didn't get confidence in you. And so as an entrepreneur, how do you get that feedback, and how do you, it's very difficult. And so part of what we do is, Casey and I have done some events where we try to at least get a window of that feedback, so you get some of that. But as a VC, let me talk about broadly how many VCs are looking at a company. Again, everybody will have different nuances to this, but on a very high level, similar blocks. But how they look at teams could be very different because it's very much more subjective. But on a broadly speaking, they're looking at the market opportunity if it's big enough. And it's very important to understand the kind of VC you're dealing with or investor, and they have very different goals. So somebody who's running a big venture fund, which is a $500 million venture fund, has very different objective than a investor who's putting $25,000 of personal capital to work. Just to give an example, or maybe explain the reasoning behind that. Let's say you're running a big fund. You have a big, one of the big VCs, you have $500 million fund or $300 million fund, and you go to invest in, let's say, 25, 30 companies from this fund. And you as a VC, you have $500 million. You want to return back 3 times this money back to your investors. So you want to return $1.5 billion back to your investors. If you're going to invest in 30, 40 companies and maybe 5 companies become successful, we're talking about each of these companies has to return $300 million back to that VC. And this is to that VC, which means if that VC owns 20% of that company, we're talking about this company has to be $1 billion or more before it makes sense for them to invest. So that's the lens a big VC fund is looking at a company. Can this be $1 billion company? And you may have this great idea, you know what, I can take this money and make, you give me $1 million, I'll make it $10 million. But unless this has that scale potential for a big VC, it's not a fit for them. That's how they're looking at. Oftentimes, when you look at the angels, they're looking at from a perspective, you know what, I don't need 10x, give me 3x, but I don't want to lose my money. So they're looking for a different lens. So a lot has to do with you understanding what are the objectives of that investor and aligning the kind of money you need with that. So anyway, so that's about market opportunity. So different people look at the market opportunity very differently. The second is team. And again, we'll go into a deeper dive into what team is separately. Third is around what is unique to you. You need to have a unique edge for what you're doing compared to other companies. So what is your unique edge and how strong it is, how sustainable is that? And fourth is the economics of that deal. Is it the valuation, the amount of money, is this make sense for that investor? So that's broadly, does that make sense?
Yeah. And to add to what Ankur said once, that we did some events where Ankur came up the idea about giving private feedbacks. This event was a big hit. We have people like John of Ethello who's pitched with us a lot of times. And then I decided to turn one of my pitch events where there are no winners or losers. In fact, we had a VC who used to come from LA to be on our panel, and he's from USC Mentor Ventures, and he's former professor in USC, and he always gave the story about how the co-founder of Box or co-founder of Pandora, they all lost the pitches, but they started billion-dollar companies. So after this event with Ankur, one of our monthly event became feedback. So what happens, say 15 startups pitch and we have 4 investors, then what we tell each investor, just pick 4 and give one-on-one feedback for 2 minutes to all these VCs, to all these companies, and they love it. And so before I did this event with Ankur, my consciousness was not open in this area, that okay, people need empathy. It's not about winning or losing. But after doing that event, I became more conscious of what some of the startups are seeking. They want mentorship, and if they can get 1 or 2 minutes private meeting with a VC where they can get real feedback. Because in public, people will be politically correct. So that is consciousness. Consciousness doesn't need to be something huge, esoteric, out there. It is within all of us, and it's about how we improve our awareness. And it could be empathy towards a person, or it could be planetary consciousness to the ecology, to how we exist as a system with other humans and even animals and plants. So on that note, we are going to go to the next question. You have a strong passion. See, I have to now go back to the questions, canned questions, because sometimes we don't want to get too far away from reality. So you have a strong passion for yoga and meditation. Can you tell us how it makes a difference in the life of an entrepreneur?
How many of you, a lot of you introduced, how many of you are entrepreneurs? How many of you have experienced stress? So the entrepreneurial journey, of course, is full of ups and downs, and the long-lasting, it's a marathon, and you have to build yourself for to go long distance, and which means there are a number of levers that you need to use to be able to do that. First, just at a personal level, being able to exist in a way where stress is not a problem, where you have the right kind of energy levels, you have the right balance within you to be able to just focus on what's needed and just move through life with low friction. If you have very high friction, then it's going to be very difficult, just to get your company from A to point B, which is it's a lot of heavy lifting. It'll take a big toll on you. And we're talking about taking the company very, very far. You won't have the appetite to go very far. So life has to become a lot more frictionless. And how do you make it a lot more frictionless? And I think that's where you need that inner management to be able to set yourself up, both in terms of your inner state, your mind, your body, your emotions, your energy, and being able to exist with the ecosystem and being in tune with it to move through life much more effortlessly. So that's on the personal side. The second is, as an entrepreneur, you are making hundreds of decisions. You're being bombarded by data in all different directions. And for you to be able to process all of that effectively and being able to do what's needed and make those right decisions, I think it's a huge support. If I look at my experience in the last 10, 11 years, my productivity has gone up probably 4 or 5x. I mean, I'm not exaggerating, it's really what I've seen. And you need that to be able to succeed as an entrepreneur and get to the next level. So one of my portfolio entrepreneurs, this was a company in the networking space. They were building a management product for newer kind of networks, and they were acquired about 8 months ago by VMware. Was successful exit, quite successful exit. And this founder used to practice meditation every day, and he came up after that saying, this was by far, I couldn't have done without it. This allowed me to go through the journey and make the right decisions and have the right kind of perspective in life every day, without which I just wouldn't have managed it. So I've seen that in practice with many entrepreneurs who've been successful. Many of them are not public about it. They don't really go out to the world and say it, but in personal lives, many of them practice something which keeps them going in the right way.
Great. What are some common mistakes entrepreneurs make?
Well, all of you are entrepreneurs. Maybe you'll know more than me, and I'm sure you can write books on that. I mean, there are a lot of things on the outside which you would have already known, or people talk about commonly. So let me talk about something which are more on the inner aspects, which are maybe less commonly discussed. First is, you need to be able to have a vision where you feel you're a small part. You need to be small in terms of your vision. If you are too big in your own eyes, that will not take your company where you need to go, because it doesn't have to be done your way. It doesn't necessarily have to be done with you sitting on the top. When you have the flexibility that the vision is much bigger than you, then people around you, they see that. And your whole ecosystem starts to work in a way which you may not completely see it right now, but the power magnifies. So that's one mistake I think many people make by being too important in their own eyes. Second is you have to listen very, very carefully. And that's maybe somewhat related to the first one. When naturally you feel curious, you feel that you don't know everything, you just listen. And it's not uncommon and you may have experienced this, you're sitting in a meeting and the 4 people in that meeting, and you come back and all of them have listened something, they have very different impression of what happened in that meeting. What did a customer say or what did an investor say? Because most people are not really paying attention. They're thinking something and they're projecting their thoughts on what they're listening. If you truly are able to listen very intently, I would say it will accelerate your progress by 3x at least. Many things which you think your customers need, actually they don't need, or many things you don't realize they actually need. Same with investors. You'll be able to read people and be able to understand what they need in a much faster way. So those are 2 very key things. Third, I would say is, as entrepreneurs, invariably you want to do too many things. And it's a very common problem with entrepreneurs. They just have all these things in their mind. And as a VC, one of the key areas we work with entrepreneurs is around helping them focus on that. What's that one thing you should do in limited resources with limited time, which will move the ball in the larger vision that you want to achieve, and just focus on that. And I think many companies have died trying to do too many things.
Well, that's a great insight. Really love it. Ankur, can you give 1 or 2 examples of where people did meditation and then they improved and were successful? Or you could also say when they did not do meditation and they failed, but if they had done, they would have. I know it's tricky and it's not here, but I think that people will be able to more take it deeper with some examples.
So give somebody who practiced meditation and succeeded. I already gave one example, but it's not, you look back, many people you would have heard of, Mark Benioff, Steve Jobs, they all practice meditation in their everyday lives. And some of these things they made public, some things less public, but they do. Many successful entrepreneurs, in fact, if you go on search online, there was an article in Time or Fortune some time ago which listed top 15 or top 20 successful business executives or CEOs which do meditation, and has literally the who's who of CEO of Aetna. Many companies do that. So I think a lot of examples of people who are successful and who attribute a lot of their success to meditation, and that came out of that. In terms of people who who failed and who think meditation would be different, I think, hard to give specific names, but most people who have that realization comes after you've practiced meditation, and then you look back and say, what, if I had known this 10 years ago, then my life would have been different. I meet many people like that all the time. I conduct a lot of meditation workshops, so many people who've been through it, or maybe I've been, a lot of people come and discuss their life stories, and any number of them say that, if I had known this 20 years ago, my previous journey would be very different.
Great. How can people follow you?
They don't have to follow me. They just
or find when you're doing a meditation workshop.
Tools. There are tools which I learned, and other people are welcome to apply the same tools in their life, and they may. I think they'll see huge benefits. So, what kind of tools? Essentially, there are 3 levels. One was there are techniques around building your awareness, and how do you, many of the patterns which you think are, which you go through could be very counterproductive, and being able to understand, observe those patterns and change them. I'll tell you a little story. So there was this gentleman who used to go home every day, quite late, drunk, and he would go home at maybe 2 a.m., 3 a.m., take off his shoes, slap his one shoe on the wall, and then slap the other shoe on the wall, and he was drunk, and his neighbors of course, were quite unhappy, and they will shout out, "Hey, you're waking us up in the middle of the night, and can't you stop doing this and not smashing your shoes against the wall?" And one day, we went back home again, smashed his first shoe, and then he realized, oh, I should be considerate about my neighbors. So he just, doesn't smash the other shoe. He just goes down to, sleeps in his bed, puts his blanket, goes to sleep. So, 3 a.m., nothing happens. 4 a.m., nothing happens. 5 a.m., he gets a knock on the front door, his neighbor, and he's like, "Can you please smash the other shoe and let me go to sleep? I'm waiting for the other shoe to." So when you have these patterns, it is very hard to break those patterns. And so it takes, and these are actually neurally wired in many cases. It's just not a factor of, I just need to be determined and I'll change it. You sometimes have to, there are specific techniques which help you, let me call it, unwire yourself so you can look at life in a different way. So that's one. Second is things around lifestyle, like diet, which is super helpful. And third, there are specific techniques. One class of techniques called kriyas. These are very powerful and energizing techniques in the system of yoga, which use the breath. And I've seen phenomenal results coming out of some of these kriyas. There's one kriya I learned many years ago called Shambhavi Mahamudra. It's a Sanskrit word. It's a practice probably thousands of years old. It's called Shambhavi, Shambhavi, literally means twilight. And I just saw phenomenal results with that practice, amazing ones. So these are some of the tools that have worked for me in my life. I'm sure there are others in the room who will have their own stories, and I will certainly, and many of the entrepreneurs, in fact, the entrepreneur I'm mentioning who sold the company to VMware, he also used to practice the same technique. So something worth for some of you to try if you would like to explore.
Great. And a comment on the first of the three practices, which is about our mind is wired, but we can unwire. And there is this saying in psychology called Hebb's Law, which says neurons that fire together wire together. So you can make a conscious effort to fire your neurons. On that note, one of our, David, come to the front. We have one of our serial pitchers, David. He pitched with us. He's a conscious being. He went on a pilgrimage to Mount Kailash with Ankur's main guru. And David, he's a mindfulness coach. Have a seat. And he's also, his company raised funding. And now he has been hired by another company to raise funding for them. So if you cannot get funding, you can hire David and he can raise funding for you and pitch, because he pitches with consciousness. So on that note, we are going to go to the next question. So let's talk about the future first. We all, as human beings, we are teleological. We love the crystal balls. And so what do you see the early stage funding evolving in the next 3 years?
Well, let me look at my crystal ball. I think early stage funding has, at least at the angel stage, has begun to dry up over the past, on a relative scale. Dry up is a strong word, but about 3 or 4 years ago, it used to be easier to raise very early stage angel funding. I think there are fewer angels who are investing compared to what I saw 3-4 years ago. The companies which have significant traction, they are continuing to see a lot of interest in terms of they're raising a lot of money at high valuations. Markets tend to be cyclical, and we've had in the last 6 or 7 years, we've had a fairly up cycle in terms of startups and high valuations. So it's not unexpected that there will be a downturn in the next 3 years, before the end of 3 years. So I would expect for early stage companies, funding probably, I expect to be a harder environment in the coming 3 years. There'll be windows which are easier versus others compared to what it's been the last 5 years. Last 5 years there was a lot of money flowing in the system, and I think it's beginning to change a little bit, especially at early stage.
Okay. And since I throw a lot of tech events and pitch events, what we are seeing is people are coming from all around the world. So it's not just about the local economy. People, the money is coming, people are coming from everywhere. And so it's about how you look. I know people who tried to raise angel funding and they raised money from corporate ventures because on the one hand angel funding has dropped from last 2 years. On the other hand, corporate funding in even early stage startups have gone up because increasingly we are at a tectonic shift in society where innovation is happening when big companies are either investing in startups or buying startups. I just saw Kellogg Ventures invested a lot in someone who pitched with us a few years ago. So start looking in non-traditional areas, family offices. Someone who pitched with us, Jude, joined a Pointer. He's an Israeli company which came here. They are creating very innovative real estate platform. Finally, my co-founder got them connected with some family offices and they raised some funding. So if what is front of you is shrinking, that doesn't mean the opportunity doesn't exist. You just have to develop peripheral vision, raise your perception, and start looking at different areas. So on that note, let's do this. We are going to take one more prognosis of the future. What do you think? People, entrepreneurs, learn meditation, become more conscious. How can they become more conscious? Just why don't you give 3 tips for increasing consciousness? 3, not out of the canned presentation.
I think how you become, or let's see, the word consciousness is so, people have different images that come in their mind. The way I think is when you, at least one aspect, let me talk about one way aspect of it, which is you respond consciously in what you do. You're not just reactive. There's a space between stimulus and response. And what I mean by that is, and I've experienced that in my life, there's almost a little gap that comes between what you call as you and what you call as your mind and your body. And once that gap comes, you're able to do things you're able to use your body and mind more as a tool rather than they taking you over. And so that's maybe one way of looking at it. How do you develop it? I think, again, I said there are specific tools and techniques. It needs, just like anything in life, it requires some focused attention and some commitment. It needs, like in my case, I did this program called Inner Engineering. I started practicing take me 25 minutes a day. And over a period of time, I could start seeing those shifts. But you need, at least it has to be a priority for you, that you need to do this and you have to commit some time to it. In terms of how the life changes, I mentioned some examples. But as an entrepreneur, apart from improving your own quality of life, yes, there's one way to do things is you're just burning the midnight oil and you're working 16, 18 hours a day. And of course, as an entrepreneur, you have to do that. But the bigger shifts or bigger step functions in your growth as a company come when you're able to see things that others cannot. And that's where I saw firsthand how this helps, because all this data that's being thrown at you, being able to look at that and able to put these data points together in different ways to allow you to see things or insights which others do not. That's where the unique edge comes, and that's where you're able to do things differently. And I think as an entrepreneur, that's huge. Without that, it's hard to grow.
Lovely. I love it. On the one hand, you said you need to pick one area and be focused. On the other hand, you need to see the entire data point. When I'll briefly state my experience when I wrote my book, I wrote it for 7 years and now I'm going to republish it. I started talking about change. When I first started, I said change is the essence of everything in the universe. A very motherhood statement when I look back after 10 years. Now I'm saying embrace the paradox of change. If something appears too logical, that means you are living in the past, out of touch with reality, because the future is messy and asymmetrical. So on that note, when I read a lot, I love this one definition of consciousness. It's from the Katha Upanishad. Upanishad is a fountainhead of Eastern wisdom from where both Buddhist and Hindu philosophy is derived. It says meditation can take you deeper and deeper into consciousness, from the world of words to the world of thoughts, then beyond thoughts into the wisdom of the self. Take a look at it again. World of words, like we are talking. So when you quieten your words, quieten your mind, you see deeper thoughts, which is thoughts of how you feel, how you see, your perception, intuition. And then when you even quieten your deeper thoughts, that's when you can access the phenomenal power at the core of your being. On that note, we are going to change the format a little bit because we are going to take the questions now. Because after we interview Bobby, then it will be too late for people to remember what Ankur said. So whoever wants to ask questions, let's just have 4 or 5 questions. We have some amazing mentors in the room, so I hope you'll be able to ask some questions.
Can you give them the...
Okay. So, Ankur, what do you think? What are you looking for in a company right now? Besides these qualities that you're talking about, are there any particular?
You mean what? So I mentioned sort of these 4 buckets: team, market, economics, the unique edge. In terms of the team, I said that's a huge topic by itself. But let me try to bring some structure into what I mean by team, and different people may look at it slightly differently. Let me first break up the team capabilities into 3 buckets. One, let me call it pure execution. This is sort of what people often come up with. They have got good track records. They can get things done. They know how to run businesses. They understand business. They understand how to build companies or running businesses. Second is whatever is the unique proposition of that company, they need to have that domain experience, or that something that makes them able to deliver that unique edge. So if you're building a next generation database company, then maybe you worked 10 years in databases and one of the great database companies, so you have a certain insight into how do you develop a next generation database which others don't. Or if you're building a new fashion tech startup, you have a certain sense of design which is very unique to you, which others don't. So what is it that makes it unique? Third is leadership. And when I say leadership, it is not in the sense that you need to manage teams of 1,000 people. This is in the sense of, are you able to inspire and get people moving in a certain direction? And you need that for your early customers, you need that for your investors, you need that for the early employees. People have to trust in your vision and in what you do and get behind you and support you. And you need to be able to drive that. Then the underpinning all of that, let me use the word inner management, which is really about how do you manage yourself, your mind, your body, your emotions, your energy. And that comes across as, let's say, if I'm in a meeting with a company, it's funny, the people who are good in some of these capabilities, and when I say inner management, they can read you. You don't have to, when you ask questions, what is it that you're concerned about or what you're questioning? What is it when you want to move fast or slow? What is it that which you think is relevant or not relevant? You actually don't, it's almost a lot of the communication is non-verbal. And the best leaders, the most successful people, they are really good at reading other people. And literally you can feel that in those conversations and how those go. And so, and oftentimes that's, in fact, you know that as an entrepreneur, yes, there's a technology and product aspect, but the bigger aspect of what makes you successful is navigating people. And the more capable you are in terms of reading people, understanding people, and navigating how people function, the more successful you will be as an entrepreneur. But that's what I'm looking at.
That's great.
Yeah.
You want me to wait for that thing? Yeah.
Oh, sure. It's right here.
Hi, I'm Tiffany. So I've heard you, I'm really curious about, you talked about empathy, and you talked about your journey to that, to, into the realm of consciousness and then becoming and being of consciousness. How do you bring that into your work, into your companies and the companies that you fund? Like, can you give an example of how that has a much more global impact beyond you?
So, because I've seen what kind of impact entrepreneurs who are more self-aware or mindful or whatever word you would want to use, they, in my experience, dramatically outperform other people as entrepreneurs. So those are the characteristics I look for when investing in a company. So some of the things I mentioned around being able to have a vision and you being much smaller in terms of the vision. I think that's to me, somebody who's with self-awareness would demonstrate that trait. Of people would tend to be much more inclusive, and not out of a moral or not because they need to do good, but once your perception goes up, you can just see the interconnectedness of life in a certain way, and that inclusion comes naturally. It is not something that's forced. It's not something that, because I want to do good. It's just something you're able to see, and that inclusion is very important because that's what allows you to, as I said, as an entrepreneur, you're only one person, but you need the whole world to move behind you if you want to do something big. And once you're inclusive, you're able to do that. You're able to get the support of the larger ecosystem behind you. The other thing is, I was talking about responding consciously. These are some of the characteristics they exhibit. So interestingly, about more than half of the entrepreneurs in my portfolio, they practice meditation. But it's not that somebody who does not practice meditation cannot be like that. These are tools. Some people are very fit and they may not exercise every day, but they still seem very fit. And some people exercise every day and still they're not very fit. But if you do a broader correlation in the society, people who exercise would tend to be fitter. So it's like that. Meditation is a big support, but doesn't mean everybody who meditates suddenly they've achieved cloud nine and somebody who does not, is not. So but it's enabler, it's support for what you do.
Hi, I'm Jing Han, and I have a question about how did you shift from your computer science major, like this area, to the venture capital area? Because I am a business management economics background. I'm just wondering, what kind of experience or what kind of degree, can, in your opinion, can help me to get into the VC, VC or investment area? And because I know different investors, they have different way to see this project, to see this startup, if they have a how to say a future or something. And it's not only analyzing those financial statement, and sometimes you need to see know how to see people, how to analyze people. So yeah, just some yeah.
So venture is a very small industry, and so I think you'll meet people coming in from different paths. It's not a very structured process, unlike, let's say, a consulting or banking, where they recruit hundreds of people every year or thousands of people every year. There's a process to that. In my case, how it happened was, one of my colleagues from Wharton, he used to work at this venture capital firm, and they were looking to bring on somebody new. And at Wharton, I was the Palmer Scholar. I was the top of the class there. So he referred my name, and I spent some time with the firm and looked at a few deals together, and chemistry worked, and we had mutual respect, and I ended up joining that firm. So it was not a very planned transition. Most people who go into venture capital, they typically have good experience with startups. They've been startup founders, or they've had great operating backgrounds in startups. And so the VCs feel that this person has the right kind of insight into what makes a startup successful. And they also have the right kind of network to be able to find other people who will be successful entrepreneurs. Those are the capabilities they're looking at. And I think a lot of the hiring comes through just personal referrals, introductions. So it's about getting to know a lot of people in the industry, and if you leave positive impressions across your lot of meetings, then you have data points. When people think of hiring someone, they'll think of you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Athena. What was the most challenging experience as a VC, and how has meditation yoga practice help you overcome such challenge and move forward?
So professionally, the most challenging experience for me actually has been as an entrepreneur. Shutting down, when my company shut down, I had just a lot of people who would put money in the company. They put money because of you. They say, oh, because you're doing this company and I'll put money in this. So losing that money was very, very painful. To have lost money for people who put money just betting on you. That was very painful. Of course, there were other things. I had taken, the company had taken loans which I had personally guaranteed, and I had not taken a salary for 3 years as part of the startup. So there was a lot of economic pain associated with that. But the biggest challenge was losing money for people who put money on you. And as a VC, that's actually the fiduciary responsibility of people who, I think a lot of people as entrepreneurs don't appreciate that as a VC, there's a fiduciary responsibility of managing people's money who've put money in your fund, and making sure you deliver to that is something that I take very responsibly and with a lot of high priority to that. Yeah.
Hey man, thank you so much for your insight. It's been really valuable. I've been maybe a 22-year meditator, and it's been, like you said, it's been I didn't expect it to be, but it's an extremely useful tool in business, especially when mitigating, your own experience of what you're creating and the expectations you set with others. And I've even found in terms of creating a culture within your organization, you can create a culture of peace and relaxation and actually spaciousness. So many times it's so caffeinated and go, and you create all that, right? So my question for you is the following. There's as much as we value process and logic, these are things that can be trained. You can actually learn these things. However, in most of the greats, whether it's in business or otherwise, they always had this one rare thing called vision. What do you feel is the relationship of meditation to vision?
I think vision is very critical in any kind of success. And many times people think of vision as painting some great story. You draw up some big slide around how we'll conquer the world, and they think that's vision. Vision literally means being able to see clearly and being able to see the way it is, not planting without distortions, just being able to see. And I was giving the example of you as an entrepreneur, one of the big edge, it's a huge edge if you are able to see things others don't. And that is about vision. That's about, can you see things which others don't? And for me, meditation has been the most phenomenal driver in able to develop my vision. Being able to see things in a very clear way. I was giving the example of how it's so common for people to be in the same room, in the same event, same meeting, but have very different ideas of what happened. Because most people are not grounded in reality. They're just thinking life. They're not living life. And the more you're able to transition life from thinking to living, the more your vision clears up, the more you can see things, the reality the way it is, which others don't. So in very pragmatic terms, it means you're able to see much further ahead of how these data points come together, what happens in the future. People think that you're some kind of fortune teller. It's not about fortune telling. It's just, if you're driving on 101 North and I'm sitting in San Mateo, I can predict with a high degree of confidence or 80% confidence you're going to San Francisco. It's not fortune telling. I just can have vision. I can see further. But a lot of times, if you're too clouded with your own, I would say, likes, dislikes, a lot of the baggage you've gathered, it clouds your vision. And once using specific meditative techniques, you're able to clear that out, your vision just clears up in an amazing way. And you can see things which often other people think it's very unique, but actually just seeing reality the way it is.
He's Sadhguru's biggest fan in Bay Area.
This program I did 11 years ago, this was actually this yogi Sadhguru who had come out from, and I'll tell you this funny story. So my father initially called me up. He said, there's this yogi, his name is Sadhguru, who is coming to the Bay Area. I'd never heard of him, and I said, well, I'm so busy right now. I have a camping trip this weekend, and you have no idea how difficult it is to find a campsite on Sunset Beach in summer. Anybody been to Sunset Beach? So in Santa Cruz. So fortunately, my dad pushed me a little bit. He said, these things don't happen every day. You should try it. And so I went for this talk. And what he says is, there have been many times in your life you thought, if this happens, then life is settled. Or if that happens, life is settled. If you look back at your life, many of those things have already happened, but life has not been settled. And if you look at yourself more closely, you'll see that you're seeking expansion. It doesn't matter what your currency is. For some people it is money, for some people it is power, love, knowledge, whatever currency you know best, you're seeking expansion in that. And if you look at yourself even more closely, what you'll realize is you're seeking boundless expansion. You're seeking infinity. But what you're doing is you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, hoping to get to infinity. That's a life of endless counting. That is as if you're riding a horse and you want to get to the moon. You can keep whipping the horse. You can whip it dead, but you will not get to the moon. If you have to get to the moon, you need a different vehicle. Similarly, if you have to touch infinity, you need a different vehicle. You have to turn inward. There's a whole science to that, which is what I call inner engineering. So anyway, that's sort of what got me hooked. I said, okay, this sounds so foundational. I'll be stupid if I don't explore this. So that's how I began my journey.
Yeah, for a lot of us tech people, a nice concept is the concept of the hardware of the brain, the neurology of the brain, but the software itself is our own experience. It's our own personality, you could say, and that is actually malleable. You can actually, for lack of a better term, engineer your inner world to and I think that the stress, you brought up stress earlier. I mean, stress really is our own minds turning against ourselves. It's us torturing our own selves, with maybe a meaningful concern about something that won't allow us to sleep at night. I know I was dealing with insomnia for years before I learned how to just develop a different relationship with what was happening inside. Would you mind sharing, this is a private question, you can say no, but would you be willing to describe your journey with inner engineering?
No, I think it's out the scope of this. What we'll do is we'll take 2 more quick questions, and then we'll go to start the second part. And we have to end this at 8. So the networking part, we are gonna go to Schroeder's. You guys know where it is. We'll all walk there. It's around the corner, opposite Harrington's. They are really good. They let you take over huge tables. And when we throw events at Pillsbury Law, we go there. So just pass it around. 2 more questions.
So general question is, when's the best time to approach a VC for investment? Like, is it at the idea stage or the prototype stage, or once you get your first few customers? Like, when's the best time to do it?
The best time is when they'll believe your story. No, it depends. Different companies or different teams, of course, as an entrepreneur, if you're looking to raise money, your goal is to do it sooner than later if you need money right now. But the barrier is, what kind of data points do they need to see before they get conviction this is something that's going to succeed? So it depends on your background, your story. If you are a CTO of Facebook and you want to do something new, which is something that Facebook has done, and now you want to productize as a company, or you are at Google, you may raise the money at an idea stage because they say you've had the credibility, you've done this in another company, will give you money right away. Maybe in some cases they want to see some prototypes, in some cases they want to see some customers. It depends on what are the key questions they have. Is it about, does it have enough value in what you're doing? Does it have about the size of the market opportunity? Depending on the questions they have, whether are you the right person to do this? Depending on what questions they have, that you may need to show different levels of data point before somebody agrees to invest. And of course, based on the type of investor, angels will do early, big VCs will do, depending, some could do later on, depending on.
We have done some events with, I'll come to you once, I just want to make a comment. We have done some events with some of Ankur's friends, and they keep saying that their biggest difficulty is keeping the VCs away because they have all made huge exits. We hosted the co-founder of Nutanix on 7th September. We are going to host the founder and CEO of Nutanix, biggest IPO of 2016. We hosted someone who sold company to Cisco for $4 billion. That was Ankur's own event. It wasn't our joint event. So Ankur, one of the side effect of consciousness, being a conscious being, is his reputation is so strong that he is connected to lot of top people or people who have sold companies. They would invest in his fund, and so hey, that is not a bad byproduct of consciousness, which we all admire him for. For instance, he hosted Vinod Khosla 2 years ago, who was rated #1 VC in the world for 3 years in a row. And it's my privilege to trade places with Vinod and host Ankur. So the last question, Anita.
So my question. First of all, I would like to thank you for sharing the insight on meditation, because that has changed my life. I started doing it 10 years ago, and it led me to more self-development. My question is that I was told that if you take small investments from people, then later on when you go for big investments from the VCs, they won't, because there are too many stakeholders. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's very common for companies to raise angel money. When I said number of people, it's very common to raise angel money from 3, 5, 10, 12 investors. If we're talking about raising money from hundreds of, that's probably will be complicated, but raising money from 5 to 10 angels is very common in the Valley to do that.
So they don't look down upon if there are like around 5 or 10 people involved already in the company and have a share?
No, it's quite common. I mean, you do want to make sure those angels are aligned with the company where it's growing. So if VCs invest, they want, as I mentioned, their typically model is to have the company stay on for a big exit. They don't want to sell company for too small of an exit because they need to a certain scale. So as long as angels understand and they're aligned with the journey of the company, it's common for a company to have few angels investors early on.
Sure. So if I understand correctly, so the angels should be willing to stay long term with the company, with their investment.
Yes. So it's not like in 2 years, okay, I want my money back,
So like 5 to 10 years?
I mean, typically a startup, most venture funds are typically structured for 10 years. And companies, of course, they take many years to build. So generally as an angel investor who's investing, they should have at least a 5 to 10 year horizon when investing in a startup.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. On that note, a huge hand to Ankur for being here. It's a very pertinent topic for our times, but very few people have really bridged the gap between consciousness and investing. So thank you very much. And